Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Today we're going to talk about sex, marriage, and sexuality. Why is it that we can be married for quite a few years, still love each other more than ever, but for some reason eroticism and sexuality feel like it's beginning to dull? Well, joining us here on the program today is author of a new book, and that is simply that she's going to be talking with us today about these very things. She is an internationally renowned licensed and marriage family therapist with more than 20 years of clinical experience, and she's going to explain to us why couples in loving and open relationships can have a sexually dull life. She's going to join us today and talk about her book, which is Mating in Captivity, Reconciling the Erotic and the Domestic. And I'd like to welcome Esther Perel to the Beyond 50 radio program today. How are you doing, Esther?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Well, it sounds like you picked a really good body of work in which to put your life into. What made you go this direction?
Well, I have been working as a therapist for as many years as you are saying, and time and again I would meet with couples who would come in and say, we love each other very much, we have no sex. I know he loves me, it's been years since I felt wanted. And I always it would be very obvious that certain people do not get along with each other at all, no longer want to have anything to do with each other physically. That would be, there wouldn't be any reason to write a book about that. But why is it that sexuality so often fades in couples who continue to love each other as much as ever? Why doesn't good intimacy guarantee good sex? Can we want what we already have? Why is it that the forbidden is so erotic? And when we love, how does it feel? When we desire, how is it different? And these are the kinds of issues that people would talk about with me in a kind of paradox between, on the one hand, the closeness, the stability, the predictability, the safety that we seek in our committed relationships, and the fact that eroticism thrives on novelty, on mystery, on the unexpected, and even on risk. So there are two needs that we try to reconcile in one relationship, something we've never done historically, and that seem to sometimes live in tension with each other.
So it's funny because this day and age we seem to see at least the conversation out there when it comes to sex and relationships as if they're supposed to wellspring from the same source, but in fact they're actually two different things?
Yes, I think that the general idea is if you love, you desire, which is often true in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I think that the general idea is that if couples do not get along, if you fix the relationship, the sex will follow. And my experience is that often the relationship gets much better, but it doesn't translate to the bedroom. I think one thinks that if the couple is close and intimate, by definition, there will be an erotic flow. And in fact, sometimes the very ingredients that nurture love, mutuality, reciprocity, care, a sense of responsibility, are the ones that also can stifle erotic desire and the unself-consciousness and the freedom that is needed. For some people, they flow one out of the other. For others, they often exist in much more separate categories. And what's interesting is that, you say it's a new book. Actually, the book came out in America in 2006 and is now translated in 25 languages. And that paradox between the domestic and the erotic, the tension between autonomy and togetherness, or in other words, between love and desire, exists across the world where the romantic ideal has entered.
So this really crosses international boundaries. It's no different, say, in India than it is here in America?
No, it is different in traditional societies. It is different because traditional societies do not necessarily start a long-term marital relationship on the basis of love and lust.
Okay, I see. I got you.
It's wherever romanticism, but there are pockets in India of westernized people who are not embracing a traditional model that is far more based on respect than on love, in which love may grow, but it isn't the prerequisite. And so really we are talking about all cultures, but the pockets where the romantic ideal has entered, which is basically, I'm going to find one person with whom I can have everything. And that everything often has to do with whatever we used to receive from the village is what we now turn to one person for. As much a sense of belonging and grounding and kind of a transcending of our aloneness in the world. And on top of it, I want you to be my best friend, my trusted confidant, and my passionate lover to boot. Traditional societies are not individualistic societies, and so people get a lot of those things from the community, and they go to their partner for something that is far more selective.
Now, I know that in your book you talk about the curiosity of whatever happened to the group of the sexual revolution of the 60s and the 70s. And this was a time that, contraception was there for women. We didn't have to worry about diseases then like we do today, especially with HIV. And there seemed to be, at least during those times, more of what would be called the swinging relationship. In other words, these were couples that were together, but yet they would have what they call marathon sex, if you will, with other couples. So there was a lot of swapping going on. Kind of taking a look at that perspective, you were talking earlier about what was known as the forbidden becomes erotic. Did you see that as a sustainable kind of a lifestyle in what you're talking about?
Well, it's interesting because you're actually asking three questions in one. It
was a confusing time.
To not say that it is your confusing mind. So let's organize it all.
Okay.
The first part is really, there was an interest on my part. What happened to the generation that kind of blossomed in the 60s with contraception, with the women's movement, with the gay liberation movement that kind of promoted the concept of sexual identity, when premarital sex became a norm? What happened to the generation that has contraception in hand, the permission to do what they want, and no desire to do it, or at least not with each other? And they don't know why. Mm-hmm. That was one question. The question about, the way that the liberation or the liberalization of certain mores allowed people to experiment in various directions, often as a couple. The interesting thing about lifestyle or swinging is that we're not dealing with the forbidden. It is a consensual adultery in which a couple decides together to experiment under the gaze of each other. It's a joint experimentation, usually meant to increase a certain intensity, a certain spark in their own relationship. There are very few couples who are swinging for life. These are things that people choose to do at certain points in their life, sometimes on and off, sometimes for an extended period, and then something else enters into the picture. But they're part of a desire to see, they're part of a conception that looks at sexuality as something that needs to be expansive, that is about growth, that is about exploration. It's a very different view of sexuality. It is not about making babies. It is not just about intimate connection. It is also about erotic exploration. And then the question about today, I think today we are having a proliferation of couples that are negotiating certain forms of new monogamies. And it is never done by people who don't believe in the relationship and in the viability of a long-term relationship. These kinds of explorations are usually done by people who are trying to find ways to stay together, given that 50% of first marriages end in divorce and 65% of second marriages, and the vast majority of them are usually what is typically called closed relationships. They're not the experimenters. Actually, much of the research supports that people who explore with their sexuality together or with an agreement with each other make the subject something that is far more hidden, far less secretive, and far more central in the relationship, so that it becomes a nurturing feature of the couple. And new monogamy today pretty much is about how do people negotiate loyalty, emotional commitment, the primacy of the relationship in ways that are not just defined primarily through sexual exclusivity. so that in some way it is meant to avoid infidelity, affairs, betrayal, and usually the collapse of the entire marriage in couples that often didn't need to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm. So,
how confusing was that?
Yeah, it certainly put me in a tailspin here. It's just really, it's fascinating because usually it seems common, at least from information that's available out there, that within 5 years of marriage that the sex that was there before in the relationship sort of dies down. It could go from anywhere from 3 times a week to as little as once a month. And then people generally, as we've had doctors close to such as the kind of work that you do, they will say, well, if it dies down, then there's something wrong in the relationship. Now, is that necessarily true?
Look, it's not the way I look at things, okay?
Okay.
I don't know if it's true or not true, but I have a very different perspective. I think it actually is less than 5 years. I think the initial passion, which exists in some couples, though it's not a given in general, the general view is to think couples start in a high point, full of passion, boundless lust, and they have only one place to go, and that's down.
Yeah, and I do actually agree with that, and it's interesting that in relationships, especially from the perspective of men, is they're hot for the woman, and like a hunter, once you've captured the prize, then it's like, okay, now what?
Well, I don't think you ever capture her. You
Okay.
ever capture her. That's an illusion. That's an illusion that makes you feel comfortable until the day that the other person eludes you, and then you realize that they never belonged to you in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that it fades and that after 2 years it's all over, no. I think that couples who have a spark are couples who know to resurrect desire when it lags. And what that means is you no longer just have pheromones and testosterone and dopamines rushing through you, but you have something that is far more important in the erotic experience, and that is the power of the imagination. Mm-hmm. What sustains desire has nothing to do with frequency. This is a real statistical, result-oriented approach to sex. The question is not if people are having sex 3 times a week. Women did that for generations and never had a good time.
Okay.
So the quality of the sex is really what one talks about. And that has to do with seduction, with anticipation, with playfulness, with curiosity, with imagination. These are the erotic ingredients. And to want sex, it needs to be sex worth wanting. When it gets boring, repetitious, routine, not exploratory, not vulnerable in the way that people actually can connect, then why should people engage with each other? Age usually makes it better. Contrary to what people often think about, it doesn't necessarily make it better frequency-wise and drive-wise, but it makes it better because people's mind, people's head frees up. Less inhibition sometimes, less forbidden, less what should I do versus what I really feel like doing. People become more, hopefully, self-aware and self-accepting, and those are essential ingredients to maintaining desire, to feeling sexy, and therefore to want to be sexual.
The book is Mating in Captivity, and our guest today, Esther Perel, and she's talking with us about, I guess you could almost say, a refreshing approach to what we commonly hear out there from therapists or sexual experts, where you were talking earlier about, no, just because it's more frequent doesn't mean the relationship's stronger, because it could be, as you said, very empty, very boring. But it's the idea that the passion and the sexual relationship should have that fire, and if it's once a month, then so be it. So that's really quite a different approach, because I know that there are a lot of loving couples out there that, the sex just isn't there, maybe because there's a bit of boredom going on, or as you said, repetition. So what are some ways that you can kind of stimulate the fire without feeling like you're cheating the system, or you're being counterfeit, so to speak?
When couples complain about the listlessness of their sex lives, they sometimes want more sex, more frequency, but they always want better sex. And the better that they're talking about is to reconnect with a sense of aliveness and vibrancy and vitality. the studies will show that the vast majority of frequent sex lasts about 3 minutes. Let's get real for a moment.
Okay.
We're not talking about a discovery, an encounter, a playfulness, a joint trip to some transcending, experience. We're talking often about something that is that is about release, that is quick-lived, often quite routine, and not particularly imaginative or rejuvenating. Couples, really what they talk about is eroticism. It's that eroticism in the mystical sense of the word, which means aliveness. Perfunctory sex that is deadening doesn't do much for many people, which is one of the reasons they stop doing it. So when you ask people, give me a moment, and I actually went to 20 countries in the last 2 years, and I've asked that same question time and again. Tell me, when do you find most drawn to your partner? And it generally is when I look at my partner doing something that he or she is passionate about, when she makes me laugh, when he surprises me, when we've been away from each other, when we reunite, when we are at a party and I see how others look at him, when I see how she talks to others, when we are out of the house and when we are free, at the beach, roaming on the water, rowing on the water. It's always descriptions. When I look at my partner from a comfortable distance as a separate person, and this person that is usually already so familiar is momentarily once again somewhat separate, somewhat mysterious, and in that space is the erotic elan. That's when I want to go toward him or her because he or she interests me. Mm-hmm. And to want to engage sexually or be excited about someone sexually, you have to be interested in the person. At least after 2 years, that's one of the things that starts to happen. And you need to feel that you are interesting to yourself and that the person is interested in you as a person. And in order to have that, people need to be able to do things that recharge their batteries. And they recharge their batteries doesn't always happen together. It happens because I go out with my friends, or I go pursue an interest that I'm drawn to, or I go travel if my partner isn't into traveling. I do things that nurture me as a person so that I bring a certain energy back home. It has nothing to do with lingerie. It has nothing to do with candles and incense. Mm-hmm. Because the people who have the spark, they often don't need the candles. They can do it with or without. And the people who don't have the erotic drive, the candles often doesn't do it. You can put on the nicest clothes you want. You can go on a date once a week. If you have nothing to say to each other, the date won't do the trick. Okay. It'll be nice. You'll have a nice moment outside. It's not that you won't get along. You may even feel that you're sitting with your best friends. But best friends usually don't make love.
Isn't that true? So it's really quite interesting how you frame this by letting people know that even though you are a couple, a married couple, you're monogamous. The fact is that what makes them sexy or arousing is that you're kind of doing your own thing.
Fire needs
so
air.
You're not. What's that?
Fire needs air.
Right, okay. So the point is that if you've got a couple that's just always together, always doing everything, that there's a fair chance that the sexuality probably isn't going to be as frequent?
Or unexistent.
Yes. Because they're always together.
Because if you're always together, there's nowhere to go anymore afterwards, right?
Yeah, that would certainly make a lot of sense.
How much closer can you get if you're all the time with each other?
Yeah.
You need distance. I mean, there needs to be a certain space. Desire needs a space to thrive. Love wants closeness. Love wants to know the other person. It wants all the details. It wants transparency sometimes if you want. But desire thrives on the elusive, on mystery, on the idea that there is still something to discover in the other person and with the other person, and it needs a certain kind of emotional separateness. And the idea that if you are emotionally entangled with each other, sometimes the confusion is that we're not talking about intimacy, but we're talking about something resembling fusion. And when people are that close, they generally don't have sex. They can be very affectionate. They can have lots of touch, but they know exactly where to draw the line, because when you become too familial with your partner, you generally are not going to be sleeping with them. It's too taboo.
Yeah, that's really an interesting way to look at this, because it really, to me, and I would think to a lot of people, makes a lot of sense, that the sexual drive and the desire comes from, as you're saying, the wellspring of the mystery in the other person and that curiosity about who that is.
And then people say, how can you create mystery after you've been 22 years with the same person?
Or in one case, I was talking with a couple. It was really an interesting situation. I said, you two really need to quit talking so much to each other. And then the lady, as quick as a dime, just simply said, you know, when you've been married 65 years, you pretty much run out of things to say. So explain how that's the possibility of changing, as you were saying, a couple that's been together for quite a while.
Look, I had a conversation earlier with one of my patients, and they had gone to see Spring Awakening, which is a show on Broadway that tells the story of a young girl that gets pregnant, has an abortion, that her mother accompanies her to, and dies. And that subject can generate days of conversation, that would all be about sexuality, if you want to even frame it like that, without talking just about what you like to do in bed. Did you ever fear getting pregnant? Did you ever get pregnant when you didn't want to? What was it like when you lost when you had a miscarriage? Did you ever impregnate a woman? What did you tell your children about protecting themselves? Did you tell your daughter not to do something she doesn't want to do? Did you tell your son to make sure that he doesn't force the woman to do something she doesn't want to do? Did you ever talk about what it was like when you were teenagers? Not how many boyfriends did you have before you met me, but really what was your own sexual awakening? I can tell you something. Couples don't talk about much of that. They'll talk. Sex is everywhere, usually except in the bedroom, except in sex. And couples will talk about a lot of things, but when it comes to that most private, most vulnerable part of themselves, their conversation tends to be very, very narrow, very limited. When you ask people, what does sex mean for you? How important is it in your life? What does it mean for you? What do you like to experience there? Is it a place where you feel free? Is it a place where you want spiritual connection? Is it a place where you seek transcendence? Is it a place where you feel that you can finally abdicate as a responsible citizen who's always taking charge and making decisions? What do you look for sex to provide? It is our mother tongue, the physical language. Long before we can utter any words, we are communicating through touch. And those kinds of conversations don't happen even at 65. Now, some people don't need them. It's not for everyone. But some people, when they say, I know my partner, there is no mystery, Proust has a beautiful sentence that the true voyage of discovery is not to travel to new countries, but to have new eyes.
Right,
and couples often think they already have gone around the block with their partner and they know everything until the day the partner cheats on them.
Right.
Then suddenly they realize that they didn't really know the person next to them. Well, who are you kidding?
Here's something that I also find interesting, too, because being in the line of work where you listen to a lot of people and a lot of types of conversations, as you were talking about, they think they know their partner until the partner runs out and cheats on them, and it's like, well, that seemed awful sudden. But then here was the same partner who was very flirtatious, probably with the opposite sex, but with no intention in mind. That's just sort of probably how they are. They're just very interactive. And then the other one feels, well, since you're kind of looking that direction and you see to divert that kind of attention in that direction, I feel that I'm not desirable anymore. So then there becomes this sort of playback where the other has to say, no, I truly love you, I do desire you, that's just some of my characteristics. How do you kind of address that with people as you nurture and talk with couples?
Look, every couple negotiates boundaries. Even the most open couples negotiate boundaries. Some people need enormous reassurance from their partner because their sexual self-esteem rests in the eyes of the other. If you look at me, if you validate me, then I feel desirable. Rather than, I feel desirable, and that's how I come to you, because I desire you, and I know that we have a connection, and of course, it is a more mutual and reciprocal. Some people put the boundary as in, I do not want you to have relationships with others. For some people, just your partner flirting with others feels enormously threatening. As if when we marry, we get a license to own our partner's sexuality. Now, men used to own women's sexuality and still do in many traditional societies.
Mm-hmm.
But in the egalitarian model of today, one is negotiating what belongs to me and what belongs to us. Why is it that because he or she looks at others and teases others, it becomes a statement about you?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that only if he looks at you and furthermore, often it is because one is being sexualized in interactions with others, just teasing, banter even, and we're not talking about anything big, then I reconnect with something inside of me, and that is an energy that I bring home to my partner.
Mm-hmm.
And the same person who says, if you play outside, I don't feel like you desire me, I would ask to that person, what do you do to make yourself desirable?
I see.
I'm sorry, what is it that you do to generate your partner's attention?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about what underwear you're wearing.
Well, I think what's interesting that you say there is the idea that the relationship is taken for granted, that this is the way it should be, and you're not doing that. And I want to understand why. And sometimes maybe even the partner's not really clear about whether that is. But you've certainly kind of cleared up a lot of things. It sounds like Kinsey would have been proud of you.
I hope that we can go. I mean, I would be very flattered if Kinsey was proud of me. And what I know is when you write a book, you are kind of on your own. You're formulating your ideas, and you're not necessarily sure how they will be received, especially when they are going a little bit against the current of a lot of things that are taken as truths when they are in fact mostly assumptions. It becomes a kind of a larger story across the world. You begin to understand the dilemma of desire. Let me tell you something. This is the first time in history where long-term relationships, couples, are having sex not because they want 12 kids and not because it is a woman's marital duty. The only reason for people to be sexual with each other today is because they feel like it. And on top of it, they live twice as long.
Right. And it's a great subject to talk about. I'd like to think about revisiting this down the road with a new set of questions. How has your book been received by people, and what kind of comments do you typically get?
The first comment I often get is the one you gave me before, which is, it's enormously refreshing. It is thoughtful. A lot of people tell me, this is what I've always thought, but I couldn't put it in words like that. You've clarified for me. I wish I had met you 20 years ago. I go on Amazon sometimes. I mean, you get mail every day. But on top of it, sometimes I go on Amazon where people, write to others versus to me about the book. And it's about the fact that it's very male-friendly. It's about the fact that it looks at the intricacies of desire and not just about sex, but about the wanting of sex in a way that is, from the word that is being used, enormously compelling and obvious once you read it, but not necessarily the way one used to think about it. It's non-judgmental. It's multicultural in its perspective. And frankly, it's been extremely successful in some countries more than others. And I kept waiting for the negative response from a number of different circles. I didn't get it not from the religious establishments in I've gone to Muslim countries, Christian countries, Jewish countries. I didn't get it from from feminists. I mean, it's really interesting. And part of what I wanted was to write a book that would take the subject of sexuality into a serious inquiry and not either smut or sanctimony, and a book that generate conversation. I am not sure I'm right by far, but I do think that there are ideas that are thought-provoking and that definitely will generate interesting conversations between partners. A lot of them are reading it to each other at night because it suddenly says, have you ever thought about that? What's your idea about this? It gives a platform that is very neutral and very engaging for couples to actually discover each other vis-a-vis their own sexuality, vis-a-vis their desire, that is not often present. It's really not about what positions do you like. And it doesn't have 10 steps. It's not about techniques because the problem of how one reconciles the tension between the need for security and the need for adventure, it's really not a problem you solve. It's a paradox that you manage.
Ah, very well said. And I was just thinking of a local radio show where in the evening they talk about sex. But what I find interesting about the program, not that I listen to it for a long period of time, actually I find that I get rather annoyed with it because you can tell it's mostly younger 20-something people, that are just, as we were talking earlier, that are just full of those, raging hormones. They think they've got the inside dope about everything, and I think to myself, but none of what you guys are saying relates to anything that couples who have been together for a while are experiencing. None of what you were saying really has anything to do to explore what it's like when you become 50, 60, and 70 years old because they can't fathom it. So it's like the young are celebrating sex, but at the same time, even through your book and through reality and experience, they don't realize that their ideal of what they think it is very short-lived, and I wonder what your conversation will be like 10 or 15 years into a relationship with somebody and how you think all these things you're suggesting and talking about and pushing the envelope on will really work.
Well, there are two angles to this that are very interesting. The first thing I would say is we don't have only one sexuality. We live much too long today. We used to die 6 years after we were done raising children 100 years ago. Now we have midlife and plus. And those are years after child-rearing. So most of us will have more than one sexuality in the course of our life. Most couples where sex completely stops after 50, it is because men completely stop. It is often because of the result of all sorts of medications that have sexual side effects and that bring men to have to redefine how they engage sexually. It is no longer autonomous, i.e. I'm aroused regardless of what we are doing together, and then I come to you once I am aroused. It now needs, actually in many ways, often more feminine or female model, which is I will become excited and aroused through how we interact with each other. It's no longer just looking down and realizing that something has happened. In young people, what happens today is that, we basically are urged to replace every product, but we're supposed to stay with the same partner forever.
Good point.
It's very difficult when you've learned to just kind of zap and you've learned to delete, to suddenly, whenever it stops being exciting, to suddenly know how you maintain excitement, a certain form of excitement. We don't make love at 70 the way we did at 30, but it actually often can be a lot more satisfying, on a different level. It's a different kind of pleasure. It's a different kind of well-being. It's a different experience of freedom, And in that sense, what we find today is that younger couples are losing sexual interest in each other far sooner than the generation of the 60s used to experience.
I agree with that, too, very much so.
It's not 5 years.
And
it's
definitely not 5 years.
And it's sometimes not even 2 years. They're losing it much, much faster because they have not had much experience of how you generate the excitement and the variety from within. It's all been about delete and get something new.
Also, at the same time, from the male perspective, it also seems to be about conquest and notches, which used to be seemingly, like a myth 30 years ago, but today seems to be the reality.
Oh no, I think that the conquest aspect of male sexuality and the desire to be conquered by women's sexuality is a very old and very universal actually script. It's one of many scripts, but it's definitely a script. I don't think that men are more predator or more conquering today. Actually, if I would say, it would be the opposite, because a lot of that male aggression has actually been tempered.
So no matter how old you are or how experienced you think you are, you really don't know as much about sex as you think you do.
No, and you can have it till the day you drop dead. That's another thing.
Preferably, that'd be a good way to go.
That would be.
Well, I want to thank you, Esther, for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. It is Mating in Captivity. Tell people, is there a website they can go to find out more about you and the book?
Yes, absolutely. It's www. Esther, Esther, Perel, Perel, in one word, estherperel.com. And the paperback is actually Mating in Captivity, Unlocking Erotic Intelligence.
Very good. Well, again,
and everything else is to be found on the website.
Very good. Well, Esther, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. It was very erotic talking with you today.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bring it home.
Oh, I'll tell you, it's always amazing when we bring some of these certain programs on, and just kind of get a fresher look at things. We want to thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com, and be sure to sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. And also, if you're suffering from hot flashes, foggy thinking, sudden weight gain, low libido, mood swings, and other effects of aging, ZRT Laboratory, the forerunner in hormone testing, is your first step toward ending troublesome symptoms. Visit them online at www.zrtlab.com to find out how their home collection kits can help detect and correct hidden hormone imbalances. Let testing be your guide to symptom relief and life-changing solutions that begin with you. And also remember, a physician's guidance is recommended. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.